Hi guys, it's Roy from Better Lost 3D here again with the fifth and final part of our modular wall series. And in this video I will be taking the models that we've created into Unity, applying materials and textures and talking about prefabs and explaining how to snap the models in a modular environment. Anyway, that's enough waffling from me. Let's get to the video. Okay, before we can put these into Unity and start playing around with them, we need to do a few things. Firstly, we need to apply all the transforms on these models, because if we look at some of these models and if we press the N key to bring up the properties panel, you'll see that the scale hasn't been applied. So what we need to do is we need to select all of our walls, not our light, all of our walls, floor and ceiling, and press Ctrl A, rotation and scale, and that just resets our scale back to 1 and our rotation back to 0. Now we've moved some of these wall pieces. For them to be exported into Unity, we need to put them back at this origin point in the center of the world. So let's just select each one at a time, and we just hover over the location and press the backspace button, and it will reset that to 0 and move it back into the correct position. So let's select the next one and backspace, select the next one and backspace, and we will do the next one will be that one, which is 3 meters high, and we'll press backspace. Okay, so now everything is in the right position and all the scales and rotation are applied. Okay, so now that everything is in the correct position and we have applied the rotation and scale, let's look at the materials. What I want is for each of the pieces to only have one material, and for all the pieces except for the floor and the ceiling to have the same material. So I'm going to go through all of my models one at a time. I'm going to remove the materials from them. Just gets them out of the way. So I've now got completely white meshes. Now the ceiling and the floor, I can leave them as they are, but what I am going to do is I'm going to rename this to Modular Walls underscore ceiling, and the same with the floor. I'm going to change that to Modular Walls underscore floor. So now I can come down to the wall and I can add back, I'm going to add back the number 2 there, I think. Yeah. And I'm going to change this, the name of this material, to Modular underscore walls. And then select the next piece, and I'm going to give that the modular walls texture, and then the next piece, and so on down the list until we have textures on everything. Modular walls and modular walls, and there we have all of our materials the same on each piece of that. This means now we can take this into Unity, and we can everything will be named nicely. You'll know exactly what material is for what set of models. So next up we are going to export. Now we could do this a couple of different ways. Firstly, we could actually select all of the objects, then export them as one object with lots of child meshes, and that would work fine in Unity. You could take it into Unity, but when you drag it into Unity, it will be one object with lots of child objects. So you would actually have to break that down and separate each of the objects and create prefabs if you wanted to use them separately. So what I tend to do, and I prefer it anyway because you have a lot more control over the object, is to select each wall piece separately and export them as separate files. That way you've got them all as separate files. They're all ready to manipulate. You don't have to do too much to get them modular in Unity. So let's start with the ceiling. I'm going to click on ceiling and go to File, Export and FBX. And I'm going to find a folder to put that in, and I've got one there called Meshes where our modular wall template was. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to rename it to modular underscore walls underscore ceiling. And because I only want to export the selected object, I'm going to limit to selected objects. And just to make sure all the transforms are applied correctly in Unity, I'm going to go Apply Scalings, click on the drop down there and select FBX Unit Scale, and then click on Apply Transform. And that should take your model into Unity so that when you drop it into the hierarchy, it will be at 0, 0, 0 location. It will have 0 rotation and it will have a scale of 1. So everything will be the correct transform. So let's hit the export button and move on to the next piece. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more piece with you, and then I'm going to go into time-lapse mode and speed through it. So we go over to File, Export, FBX, and we've got the floor highlighted. So let's change this to floor. So it's now modular underscore walls underscore floor, and all of our options, you can see, are actually already selected because we have already exported out in this session. Once you export something in a session, all the settings you use are retained until you change them again. So let's hit FBX again, and now let's fast forward. Okay, welcome back. We've got everything exported, as we can see here in this folder here. We have our modular walls template, then we have our ceiling, the corners, the doorways, the floors, the walls, and so on. And next step is to take this into Unity. Right, so for this tutorial, I've created a brand new scene in Unity's Universal Render Pipeline template. And as you can see, it comes with an example scene, a little construction scene. And we're not going to be using this. We're going to create a new scene and bring our own models in. So first things first, let's get rid of this. Let's go to the Scene tab so we can see everything. I'm going to go down to the Scenes folder. I'm going to right click on the empty space, select the Create and Scene, and that creates a new scene. Let's name that Modular Walls. And now we switch to that scene by double clicking the new scene that we've created. So now we have our empty scene. And before we bring our models into Unity, we need to do a little bit of housekeeping. Now this is something I always do and I always recommend to do when creating a project in Unity. And it's basically to set up a folder structure for the assets that you're going to bring into Unity. It just makes it a hell of a lot easier to find everything when you need it. So what we're going to do is click on the Assets button. I'm going to right click on the blank space there, Create and a Folder. And I'm going to call that Modular Walls. And we're going to go into that folder and we're going to create 4 more folders. And the first one's going to be called Meshes. Second one is going to be called Textures. The third one is going to be called Materials. And the last one is going to be called Prefabs. And I will go through what a prefab is a bit later on with you. What we need to worry about right now is the meshes, textures and materials. So now we've done our housekeeping, let's bring our models in. And doing that in Unity couldn't be simpler. All you need to do is bring in your Explorer and navigate to the folder where your meshes are. And as you can see here, I've organized my meshes into 3 different folders: ceilings, floors and walls. And I'm just going to select all of those and just drag them into my meshes folder and just give it a second or so. And if we go into our meshes folder, our files are now right there in there, ready to be used. So let's have a look and bring some of these in. So we just drag it into there. And as you can see, there's no material, there's no texture on there. There is actually material, but it's not associated with any textures yet, and we're going to need to add textures to the material. Now, if I click on this little arrow here, you'll see there's a material and a mesh within that model. If I click on the material, then it brings up the inspector panel on the right hand side, but oh, I can't edit any of it. It's not editable. It's because it's embedded into the model and it's being controlled by the model. And what we need to do is just break that out of the model. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with my first piece, which is my inner walls. And I'm just going to right click the material and I'm going to extract from prefab. And if I navigate back to my materials tab and go into my materials folder and select that folder, that's now removed that material from that mesh. And if we go back to the materials folder, you can see it's in there. And if I select it and go over to here, you can see we can now edit this material. I can add textures to that. So let's go back to our meshes and extract all of the materials. Now with the walls, we only actually want one of those materials for now. We don't need two for now. In fact, actually, yes, I'm going to keep two of these because we could do with a second one for the second set. So if I just right click on that, extract from prefab, find our materials folder and select that folder. And then with the last three, I'm actually going to extract them to the mesh folder and then just delete them. We don't need the last three wall ones. We only need two materials for now. So let's extract to the walls folder and delete those. That's the final one. And delete those. Now we need to do the ceiling and the floors. And again, we want to keep the ceiling and the floors. So let's extract them all the way to our material folder. And then again, with the floors, extract to our materials folder like so. So now if we go back, we have 4 materials in our folder. And now I find it easier if I just slide this little slider down right down to there. It then makes everything easily readable. So as you can see, we've got 2 walls, and I'm going to actually leave that as modular walls 1, and I'm going to rename this one. If I can find the rename, there it is. And I'm going to call that 2, and that's going to be our second set of wall materials. So let's go back to our main modular walls folder. We need to bring the textures in and drill down to our textures folder. And again, we just need to bring in our Explorer and find the folders where we are keeping our textures. As you can see, I've organized it into ceiling, floor, set 1 and set 2. So let's select all of those and just drag it into our textures folder like so. And it just takes a few seconds for it to update. And there are our textures. Right, now before we can use our textures, we just need to do a little bit of housekeeping on them. So let's go into our ceiling folder, and you'll notice that we've got an albedo transparency, a metallic smoothness, and a normal. Now the albedo and the metallic we can leave as they are, they're perfectly fine. But Unity needs to know that this is a normal map so that it can read the data. So if we select our normal and then go over to our inspector, it brings up all the properties for that texture. Under texture type, we just simply need to change that to normal map and then click apply. And it's now ready to use as a normal map in Unity. And we need to go through all of our textures and do that. So I'm going to time lapse that for now. Okay, so now we have our textures ready to be used. Let's go back to our materials folder and select our first wall material. And what we want to do is we want to drag our textures into these little boxes, the relevant little boxes. The only problem is now if I go back to my textures tab, I've lost my inspector properties on the materials. So let's go back to materials and select the materials again. and we'll select Modular Walls 1. And what we can do to stop this from disappearing when we try to find our textures, there's a little padlock just up here, and if we hit that and close the padlock, that means no matter what I click on now, it will always display them properties. So let's go into our textures folder, and we're going to find set 1, and there are our textures. So what we need for this, for the 3 textures, we need our albedo transparency, and that will be our base map. That is the map that contains all the base colors for our texture. So we'll drag that into there. And as you can see, it's already updated on the model just there. And if we just navigate round, we can see it's on the model, but it's looking a bit flat, obviously, because we're just using color. So what we need is the other textures. So let's drag our normal map into the normal map slot. As you can see, already that's made a huge difference. The bricks really stand out there like that. So we need to bring our final texture in, which is our metallic smoothness. And we just drag that into our metallic map. Now the metallic smoothness contains the metallic in the RGB channels, and the smoothness, or the inverse of roughness, or a glossy map, as it's called in other engines, is in the alpha channel. So it's using one texture, one image file for 2 textures. And this is controlled up here. Now it recognizes that it's a metallic smoothness map, but it still gives you a bit of extra control over the smoothness. And this works like a blend between using the texture information and using Unity's default information. So what you need to do is you need to bring that right the way back up to 1, so that it uses only the texture information. And another thing that we tend to do as well, if you look at the base map, next to the base map, you've got a colour picker and a colour there, and you can see it's slightly grey. And what this is for 2 uses. The primary use is to colour a model without using a texture. You can flat colour a model directly in Unity using this. Or if you have a texture, you can tint the texture with the colour from here. So if I click on that now, and for example, I wanted to tint this with yellow, let's see what would happen if I go up to the yellows and bring it all the way up. You can see it's tinted it, and obviously the more yellow, the more it shows. So as you can see, you can move it back in, and you can give it a really slight tint of yellow moldy colour, or you can bring it right down to the black. But because it's set at default grey, obviously it's greying out the texture slightly, so we just need to bring it back up, and it brightens the texture up. So let's close that down, and that's our textures imported and our first set added to our materials. I'm going to go through all of the other textures and set them up in a time lapse right now. Okay, so now we're back, and as you can see, I've completed our textures. We have our floor texture looking rather nice there. We have our ceiling texture, and if I bring it in one of my meshes, let's go to the wall, and let's bring in our inner corner, drag that in there, and let's rotate that by pressing E and then rotating, and if I hold the control down, I can bring it round. We have our first wall. Now we can actually change our material on that wall. let's have a look at what the brick material looks like, which is that one, I think. Nope. Materials, modular 1. Why is that showing that? Oh, it's because I've got the inspector locked. Silly. Right, let's drag that into there like that. So we can actually change the material on there like this easily, as simple as that, just by dragging our materials onto it. And I can even do that and that. You can, as you can see, you can put whatever materials we want on. And that's pretty much the basics of materials and textures inside Unity. So let's talk about prefabs. What are prefabs? In the simplest terms, they are basically copies of your entities with different properties. And basically, prefab is a way of saving that change as a separate model so that you don't have to keep making that change from the original again. So let's create an example. So we have our inner wall here, and it has this bluey green texture with the plaster walls. Now if we go down to our prefabs folder and we drag that into there, it will create a prefab. Now we want to create a prefab variant, and now what we have is a separate entity from the main entity that we can drag in as much as we like, just like a normal entity. Now if I wanted this wall to have a different texture, I could go to the materials and select the wall and drag the different texture onto that entity like so. As is, every time I place one of them walls, I will have to change the materials. But if I was to go to the prefabs and select that and drag that in there and create a prefab variant, I've now got it separate in this folder from the original. So I can then just quickly move this out of the way. I can then just sort of grab this one and drop it in. And as you see, we've got two different materials on there, but I can then drag that in there, and that's the brick one. So prefabs are just a way to make changes to a mesh without affecting the original mesh, so that you can have separate entities that you can drag in using the same mesh with different materials and different properties. So let's have a look at creating our room using these modular pieces. So what I'm going to do now is, off screen, I'm going to create prefabs from all of my pieces that I need prefabs for, and I will come back and start creating a room using these modular pieces. Okay, so I've created all my prefabs of my modular wall pieces now, except for one which I wanted to show you because I wanted to do this slightly different, and that is the ceiling. So let's go to the ceiling mesh and let's drag that into the scene, and you notice that's right down there at 0, 0, 0. Now all of our walls are actually 3 meters high, so we need that at the top of the 3 meters. So rather than create a prefab with it in position there like so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it up on the y-axis. Let's see, y position 3, and that just brings that up. And if I bring in a wall piece, any wall piece will do, bring in a wall piece, you'll notice that it is at the top of the wall like so. And why is my lighting on? Oh yes, because I'm a silly bugger. I moved the wrong light up, so I moved the directional light out of the way so that it wasn't in my way. And as you can see, the ceiling piece fits snugly on top of the wall at 3 meters height. So what I can do is go to my prefabs folder, and if I was to drag my ceiling, let's have a look at it. If I was to drag my ceiling in right now with it at this height, it would actually save that position So when I dropped another one, it would drop it in exactly the same position, 3 meters above the ground. And that way we don't have to fiddle around with moving it up and down. Right, so let's get on to creating a room, or showing you how to create a room. This is going to be a brief video just showing you how to fit the modular pieces together. I'm not going to actually create a whole room, I'm just going to show you how to manipulate the tools. So first things first, we need some walls, and I'm going to start with an inner corner. So let's drop in, I'm going to have my brick inner corner right there, and that drops in at 0, 0. So we now need to move these into position. I'm going to leave this one as is, and this is going to be the start of our model. That's going to be the corner. So let's bring in a wall, and I want to bring in a brick wall there. And you notice that brings that in at 0, 0. Now if I was to press W, or to click on the move tool in the corner there, it would bring up these arrows, and these are simple moving arrows, and you just move them backwards and forwards. Now obviously it's going to be a pain in the backside, you know, trying to line it up perfectly. Now that's the reason that we did the sizes that we did. Each of these are 2 meters by 3 meters. So now if I was to move the blue axis there, which is the Z axis, and hold down the control button, that would snap that perfectly on the grid. So let's see if we can get it into position. Now this one won't go into position to line up with the other one because I've been moving it off the grid. So let's delete that. We'll delete that for now, and we'll drag another one in and drop it there. And again, that's back at 0, 0. Now if I was to move that to the right and hold the control button, notice it snaps perfectly. And then we have a perfect snap onto that model like so. So if we bring in a couple more pieces, and the great thing is we can also select that model and press Ctrl D. And now what that's done is that has created another copy of that on top of the one that's there. Let's Ctrl C and put that back in position. And again, holding the red arrow down, press the Control, and it snaps into position like so perfectly. And that's pretty much it for snapping. There are other types of snap. For example, if I was to right now hold down V, I could snap on a vertex on the model, and now if I dragged it, I could drag it to any vertex on any other model like so. And as you can see, it's good in some cases, but grid snapping should be just fine for us if we've set our sizes up correctly. Another way to move them is quite simply with our transform properties. Now you notice 0, 0, 0 is here, and this has got a -4 on the X, and the X is the red axis, so it's -4 from the 0. If I wanted to move that further along, one more space along, I could then change that to -6, and that's a nice little gap there. So what I could do is drop a doorway in there, and then if I go up to my transform, I could change the X property to -4, and that would drop that perfectly into that space right there. And again, it's all about personal preference, but I would use the grid snapping, it's a lot easier, and then just use the transform to fine tune. Now we've shown you how to move, and now we need to know how to rotate. So let's go right there, and we'll Control D and duplicate that wall, and we want to bring it over here. So let's rotate it first, and if we go up to here, we can select the rotate tool, or we can press E to turn on the rotate widget just there. And we want to rotate it on the Y axis. Now you're saying, oh, hold on, what don't we want to do on the Z axis vertically? You're thinking Blender. In Blender, up and down is the Z axis, and in Unity, up and down is the green axis. Always remember that. Try to remember that and not get stuck into it always being Z-axis to move things up and down like I did. Okay, so now what we do is if we select the green line, we can actually move it and rotate it. And if we press Control, we can rotate it in increments and rotate it perfectly 90 degrees. Now, this is going to be a little bit more awkward because of the way the snapping system works. What I should have done, and I'm going to press Control Z, what I should have done, I should have changed the pivot point. Remember we put the origin point right in that corner, and we did that for a reason, and this is the reason. What we need to do is go up to here and toggle the handle position. So let's click that and it will change to pivot, and notice that gimbal moves down to that corner piece where we got the pivot, so we can now rotate that perfectly on that corner. So let's rotate it round to the 90 degrees. I think, oops, there should be right. Our grid snapping should now work perfectly. So if we press W to go back to moving, and we held down the blue and the control, and notice we can move it on that axis like so, and let's move it back to this position up here, and that should put that perfectly into that position like so. Sometimes Unity is a little bit funny with it. Sometimes you have to line them up slightly manually, so let's just do that just a touch there. There we go. Everything's in perfect position. But yep, that's how to use modular assets in Unity. And again, likewise with the ceiling, if I was to Control D, I can then move it along like so. And I could even shift click and Control D and move them along like that. Select everything, Control D, and move them along like so. So we now have the ceiling and walls, and again we have our floor like so. We drop it into the hierarchy, it drops it into 0, 0 position. Control D to duplicate, hold the control down and move it along, and it should get it perfectly in position there. There we go. Shift select them, Control D, and then Control and move it along in the position. I think with this piece here, I haven't 100% got the origin point right on the wall pieces, so it's slightly off on the snapping. Let's see if I can vertex snap that. This is where vertex snap comes in. We'll select that and we'll hold V down. I'm going to select this vertex right here and then snap it to this one here. And there we have it. It's connected properly. Just about right by the looks of it. And that's where vertex snapping comes in. You can just tidy up those little mistakes quite easily. And you can put together a modular room like this in pretty short time. It doesn't take very long to do, just by Control D'ing and snapping it along like so. Well, there it is. There's our modular walls in place, all snapping and looking nice in Unity. I hope you've learned something from this. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, hit that subscribe button, spam the like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want to be notified about upcoming videos, then hit the notification button and you will be notified. Thank you very much for joining me in this series, and I hope to see you all in the next one.